that there is sufficient evidence endocrine disruptors are harmful to the human body, and the EU must take immediate action based on the precautionary principle. The Swedish government has sued the European Commission for failing to act, and the Danish Ministry of the Environment has published an important paper on bisphenol A, identifying it as an undesirable substance, and thus prompting the Danish government to take steps to eliminate it. I am happy to report that Europe's toxicologists are now taking measures to preempt the depopulation lobby should it try to replace the existing, sterilizing, carcinogenic, mutagenic, bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals already identified with substitutes that are not yet known. To this effect, Europe's toxicologists have submitted a list of 15 chemicals deemed toxic to reproduction, most of which are plasticizers, to be added to the existing list, and have urged the European Commission to lift its moratorium so that these newly identified endocrine disruptors can be added to Annex 15, which is the name given to the list of chemicals that are to be removed from the environment. I am happy to report that the World Health Organization has identified endocrine disrupting chemicals as a threat to public health and especially harmful to children. But none of the above measures will amount to anything unless all covert methods of depopulation are retired and replaced with overt legislation. We have been playing a losing hide-and-seek game with the military-industrial complex since 1945, and the only way to have certainty that covert methods will be retired is to implement global replacement-level fertility as a planetary security prerogative, thus to legislate population control. This will put the onus of responsibility on people, not governments, who would then be free to choose the contraceptive method that is safest and that best meets their individual needs. The military-industrial complex will then become superfluous, as governments will meet their international obligations with respect to population control through the cooperation of their citizens, and not the imposition of covert chemical warfare. Governments would then only have to make contraceptives cheap and universally available, and ensure that their people comply with the law and that dissenters are statistically insignificant, so the international framework for peace is not upset, and mankind will be able to reach its demographic objectives and attain sustainability. Continuing to play this hide-and-seek game with the military-industrial complex will only lead to more illness, genetic and intellectual degradation, and to the eventual extermination of the vast majority of our species' genetic lineages. As it is, the worst of the damage caused so far has yet to be felt due to the lag between exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals and the manifestation of a clinical disorder, lag that could be years or decades. In the case of reproductions, for instance, research shows that infertility cannot be assessed until the exposed individual has attained a certain age, again resulting in a lag between early exposure and manifestation of a dysfunction. Furthermore, the damage is cumulative due to transgenerational and epigenetic effects. Endocrinologists warn us that EDCs may affect not only the exposed individual but also the children and subsequent generations. Recent evidence suggests that the mechanism of transmission may in some cases involve the germline and may be non-genomic. That is, effects may be transmitted not due to mutation of the DNA sequence, but rather through modifications to factors that regulate gene expression, such as DNA methylation and histone acetylation. In other words, a damaged individual will produce damaged offspring. Last but not least, we now have confirmation of the existence of non-monotonic dose-response curves with endocrine disrupting compounds. That is to say, the body's response to endocrine disruptors may be greater at lower doses, which has dire implications for risk assessments that have set safety standards too high by as much as 1,000 times or more. This means that the brightest medical minds and the most advanced diagnostic and treatment methods will have no effect whatsoever on the battle against non-communicable diseases. So long as the covert poisoning program remains in place, medicine is powerless. To successfully combat the epidemic of non-communicable diseases, we have to remove the cause of causes. We have to, in other words, shut down covert methods of depopulation and replace them with overt population control legislation. And to accomplish this, we must remove the structural obstacles that stand in the way of overt population control legislation. What are these structural obstacles? There are three: religion, democracy, and contraception. More specifically, the intractability of religious authorities with respect to contraceptives and abortion, the impossibility of being elected to high office in a democracy on a platform of population control, and the unavailability of safe contraceptives or the difficulty of getting people to use them unfailingly. Good health can only be restored if we successfully overcome these three obstacles. I have already removed the first obstacle, the intractability of religious authorities, through my 46-day hunger strike at the Vatican last year. Pope Francis and his cardinals are now firmly aligned with the United Nations. The religious and secular authorities are no longer waging an ideological battle over our dying bodies. They no longer put their self-interest and their power base ahead of our children's health and future, by failing to agree that regardless of our sensibilities and moral norms, we have no choice but to restrict our fertility. I made them understand that if national authorities continue to covertly poison their people into sterility through the basic elements of life, they endanger the very survival of the human species in their attempt to save the planet. I also made them realize that the only way to save both the planet and mankind is to bring the population control program out in the open and empower people to limit their own family size to 2 children only. But disclosure depends on the second structural obstacle: democracy. The second obstacle, the impossibility of being elected to high office in a democracy on a platform of population control, is the most difficult obstacle to overcome and the only remaining obstacle that stands in the way of legislating population control worldwide. Politicians and lawmakers are in an impossible situation. They are asked to represent the will of the people while safeguarding the rule of law and respecting democratic checks and balances, but are at the same time required by the dire circumstances of the world to pursue depopulation and globalization so we can survive into the future. Depopulation being necessary to stay within the limits of our planet and reach sustainability, while globalization being necessary so that every country can access vital raw materials regardless where they are found, and to access them on equal terms. Depopulation and globalization, however, are not popular, and because they are not popular, they cannot be accomplished democratically, and thus within the law. So they are being pursued undemocratically and outside the law, by violating the rule of law and circumventing democracy. To be able to do this, democracies have placed the responsibility for pursuing depopulation and globalization in the hands of the military-industrial complex and the United Nations, thus outside the knowledge, will, and reach of the people. And in so doing, they have delivered us all into the hands of a global killing machine, a genocidal tyranny, a tyranny that depends on secrecy, deception, manipulation, and lies in order to be able to continue to pursue the depopulation, globalization objectives extrajudicially, undemocratically, and without the people's knowledge and consent. A tyranny that rewards agro-giants for poisoning our food and beverages, and corporations for rendering our dental and cosmetic products toxic. A tyranny that rewards pharmaceutical companies for creating vaccines and medicines that sterilize and sicken us. A tyranny that rewards biotechnology companies for creating genetically modified organisms that monopolize seeds and turn our staple crops into life destroyers. A tyranny that rewards the World Health Organization and NGOs and national health authorities for complicity in crimes against humanity. This tyranny has become the very embodiment of diabolical cunning and cruelty, even though its objectives are benevolent. To bring down this system, this beast that operates outside the law and poisons our children, we need only expose its methods and means, its objectives and manipulations, its deceptions and lies. We need, in other words, just kill its cover of secrecy and drag it kicking and screaming into the glaring light of truth. It will vanish as easily as darkness vanishes with the rising sun. The truth will then set us free. But no one is willing to be the torchbearer of truth in a world where only liars are rewarded. So I became the sanctuary of truth and gave notice to every head of state and government to change course, or else they will face our wrath if they continue to poison our children. I made sure that regardless how powerful or rich they are, not one of them can hide behind the system, and that they live in fear of our retribution and of history's harsh judgment until such time as they change course and restore sanity and decency to this world. But I also armed them with the tools necessary to change course, because killing the existing system of population control and resource sharing without putting something else in its place is suicidal. For better or worse, this system has saved us from nuclear annihilation, mass starvation, and environmental devastation. What I gave them is an alternative to global tyranny decoyed by national democracy. I gave them the future of global governance. I gave them the blueprint of a global governing structure that, although outside democratic constraints with regards only to the depopulation and resource sharing objectives that we must accomplish or else perish, it is fully within the scrutiny and judgment of the world. I also gave them the global governing instrument of the planetary security prerogative, so that population control and resource sharing can henceforth be free of the self-interest of the living, to the exclusion of the unborn, and of other life forms that have no voice in our political process because they are only animals and plants. More than anything, I freed them from the self-imposed prison of mutual coercion mutually agreed upon. But for them to succeed in freeing us from covert methods of depopulation and coerced methods of globalization, we will have to give them our informed consent to go ahead and initiate a global governing structure authorized to implement overt depopulation and globalization as planetary security prerogatives. And for that to occur, we need to educate our fellow men in record time, and that requires that we all become torchbearers of truth, irrespective of our government's objectives, and fearless about repercussions to our lives and careers. What history asks of all of us is that we put our children's lives and well-being ahead of our own lives and well-being, and that we sacrifice our careers for their future. If you're not willing to do this, then you are a liability to your own children, for you will have condemned them to genocide. The third obstacle to overt population control, contraceptives, which was insurmountable when the global depopulation policy began in 1945 because there were no contraceptives available save for condoms and sponges, is no longer a problem. In 1945, the technology of birth prevention was as good as non-existent, and talking about conception in public was considered obscene and subject to imprisonment. Today, thanks to advances in medicine, we possess a multitude of contraceptives, and thanks to activist efforts, we can talk about sex and educate each other. Access to contraceptives, however, is a serious problem in the developing world, but this is a problem of capacity that can be solved. The problem of use will be resolved once replacement-level fertility is declared a planetary security prerogative and enshrined in international law. I am pushing the world statesmen to take this step in September, when they will meet at the UN to commit to the sustainability agenda. If they fail to find the courage necessary to tell the world the truth and engage the planetary security prerogative instrument I have armed them with, it will be because we as citizens have failed to do our duty to force them to show leadership. And it is our children who will pay the price for our failure, just as we pay the price for our fathers' failures. I ask that you stop being yes man and start being real man. Our children are counting on us, and we are their last line of defense. This is not a battle we can win as doctors, but only as citizens, because the cause of illness is political. That is why you must speak out, you must speak firmly, and you must risk everything in the process, as I have done. If you continue to act like sheep, this lion will continue to devour us. For if we fail to legislate replacement-level fertility as a planetary security prerogative across the world and allow our governments and the UN to continue to poison us, we will condemn our children to a life of sickness. And if we shut down covert depopulation measures but fail to implement overt depopulation, we will condemn our children to poverty and war. Human health and even life on Earth depend not on your skills as doctors, but on your courage as fathers, on your love as mothers, and on your decency as human beings. Thank you.